Good afternoon. I think because we are pressed with the time, we'll start already. And I think we have a mix of presentations and also sort of interactive talks. And then look forward to having a dialogue on that. I think energy efficiency is a very big topic, and then certainly a person like myself will not be able to summarize any kind of thing like energy efficiency in one sentence or two. So I leave this one to the distinguished guest to do so. And then I'll change the flip order a little bit. There are two presentations, so we'll start with the two presentations. But later on, we can sit down and talk a little bit. So I start with, Lynn, and then go to the professor. And then after that, we can have a conversation. Let me say that, I'm coming from the United Nations side, so I would like to connect back to this one. Dan was saying. So last year, that there were two landmark things happened. One, in December, you remember, Paris Agreement happened. So after 20 years of negotiation, this is where we came. So I think it's a great opportunity. Sustainable Development Goals, many of you are aware of. And for the first time in the history of the United Nations multilateral system, we now have a global energy goal. And that consists of mainly three targets: universal energy access by 2030, and then significantly increase renewable energy, and lastly, very importantly, doubling the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency. If you look at it, towards 2010 and 2012, energy efficiency globally in the energy intensity terms sort of improved 1.7% globally. But if you want to double by 2030, it needs to go to 2.6% annually. Can we do that? And what is a city can do, or would that city be a solution to move in that direction? I'm certain the distinguished panelists will be able to enlighten me a little bit about those things. And then we can have a discussion on that. And back to then this Habitat 3 here. Why 3? Because the first conference happened in 1976. Second one happened 1996. And the third one is happening 2016, every 2 decades. Now, you have really a great opportunity to put your thoughts into that process and get it signed by heads of the states in October this year. My question to you is that if there is one sentence, one thing that you would like to put in that outcome document in the area of energy efficiency, what would that be? So I hope that I'll get this answer by the end of this talk. With this discussion starting, so I'd like to sort of invite Lina to come over and do a sort of few presentations. Okay.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very well-organized conference. So let me first briefly introduce our organization. I come from VITO, which is a research institute based in Belgium. We do research in different domains, amongst which the domain of energy and sustainable built environment. I'll go over these figures. We are based in Belgium, as I said, but also are established in the Middle East and China. On energy and sustainable built environment, our mission is to provide knowledge to accelerate the transition towards sustainable energy systems and sustainable built environment. And we do that together in a strong cooperation with universities to cover the whole chain from fundamental to applied research and consultancy in a newly developed research center at the east of Belgium, under the umbrella of what we call Energyville, together also with IMEC, which is a research institute on photovoltaic energy. So we all know the challenge. We have to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, and transport and building sector are a very important, have taken a very important share of that emission reduction challenge. And that's, of course, where cities can take the lead. And looking at carbon footprint of, for example, here, some Belgian cities, we see that building emissions account for about up till 60% of total emission share in the carbon footprint of a typical city. And so that's where a big challenge lays in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the built environment. Investment needs, it has already been talked about a lot. We need some capital to invest in green and low carbon infrastructure, but studies have been pointed out that if we do this in the right way, there will be a huge investment in urban development in the coming years, and with a little upfront investment, we can manage that we have huge CO2 savings in the end, and also resulting in net savings, which is bigger than the upfront investment that we need. So important is that we make the right choices, and we make the right choices by envisioning the city of the future, and city of the future is a city which is green, low carbon, but also able to adapt to changing circumstances, also taking into account the vision of the city, of the citizen itself, providing high quality of living for everybody, and also have a strong economy and providing efficient urban services. So that's the city that we envision, and on all these topics, we do research in the different domains, and especially in the topic of smart cities, there is a lot of research ongoing on energy efficiency of the built environment. Of course, smart cities is a kind of buzzword. We think smartness is important because it's a means, but eventually sustainability is the goal. So if we talk about smart cities, then we talk a lot about technological solutions, but it's also important to have the right policies in place, to have the right behavioral changes, look at new business concepts, and look for integrated solutions. And that's also where our research is focusing on. So I'll give you a few examples of research that we are doing. And we are quite active in the European Smart City program, in which we deploy different concepts in living labs in different European cities. You see here a map of all projects that we are involved in this Smart City program in different cities all over Europe. And below you see which concepts or new technologies are being tested over there in real-life circumstances, to see what they can mean for this energy transition in the sustainable urban environment. I'll briefly go through some examples. One of the examples which is important is to use flexibility of the energy system, to bring more flexibility into the renewable energy system, and also to shift demand in that way that the overall system becomes more efficient. And then I have some figures with me. If we speak about flexibility, it's a lot of is possible in large industries, of course, but also residential sector. If you look at the amount of residents that we have and the flexibility they can provide, is a substantial amount. And that's why, for example, we did a big pilot project on investigating the potential of flexibility in the residential sector. And we had 240 families who were using smart appliances, smart electric vehicles, smart thermal storage. And they were subject to a dynamic pricing scheme. And it was investigated how we could shift their energy consumption and make and use the flexibility that we need. And one of the things that we are further investigating, of course, flexibility is a nice thing, but you have to support that in a smart manner. And that's why we develop smart learning algorithms that can steer the smart appliance in such a way that they adapt, learn very quickly how an end user is using its home or using its appliances, and then make the right decisions in consuming or starting up and consuming energy at the moment that prices are low. So another important thing which is addressed already today is that the energy efficiency of the built environment and the building itself is also very important. And it's very easy to have a greenfield development with new buildings meeting a lot of innovative techniques and energy performance standards, but especially in Europe, retrofitting the existing built environment is a very important challenge. And there we combine different simulation tools and decision tools on user behavior, building typology data, but also have innovative techniques of taking a scan of the built environment and in such a way that we can look at the most cost-efficient retrofit measures for the built environment. So that's also an important challenge. Of course, we need to scale this up to a district level because there is if we make the investments in redeveloping a whole district, we should do that in the most optimal way. And so that's also where we need supporting tools on this district level and visualizing the impact of certain measures in redevelopment of districts. One of the examples over there is a project which is ongoing in Amsterdam and Grenoble, where we look at really integrated approaches. So it's not only about retrofitting existing houses, but also looking at district cooling and thermal nets in the city, and also having dwellings connected to smart grids to really evolve to zero energy districts. Of course, it's not only about energy performance of a building. Materials are also important, and that's where the integrated approach comes in. We know that materials also account for a substantial part of the environmental impact of the building over its whole lifetime, and so the right choices between the use of materials, insulating a house better, or looking at the energy performance in the whole life cycle of a building is an important subject to be investigated. Same integrated approach when we look at the urban climate. We all know the urban heat island. Here you see a picture of a city of Antwerp, which is not cooling down during the night, as you see. And then the link with energy efficiency for providing cooling, for example, is an important one. So also these kind of decision tools are used in investigating optimal smart city solutions. Last but not least, I wanted to tell you something about which is a greenfield development where we are building our own research institute on renewable energy and built environment. And very short, looking 100 years back, this site where we are developing in the region of Genk, there was also almost nothing over there. It was a very rural area. In the 20s, there was coal mining industry started over there, which attracted quite a lot of industry. In the 80s, coal mines were closed, and a lot of industry is disappearing now. And so the city region of Genk has to reinvent themselves and find a new economic value proposition for its region. And they chose for heavily supporting clean tech industry, smart cities, renewable energy development. And that's why we are building over there. You see here a picture on our roof of our new building with the remnants of the coal mine industry behind it. So we are, from this new research facility, supporting transition from the black to the green energy. And as you see, there is a whole development around it on this side. You see a picture of where we are now, the picture above right. It's our research facility, which is almost final, but in the coming 10 years, there will be a whole development around it. And the idea is that we serve as an energy hub from this building, and from our research facility, we provide newest technologies, and we test these technologies both on thermal energy and power generation. We have a lot of innovative technologies that we deploy over there and can be tested. As you see, there will be a thermal grid connecting all buildings on this site. And of course, it's not only important to have a very nice greenfield development with innovative techniques. As said before by the person of IRENA, that it's quite easy to have a new building meeting highest sustainability standards and energy performance. But of course, it's also important to look at your neighbors. And with our site, also when we decide to proceed with drilling on geothermal energy, we intend to connect with the neighboring areas, and thus providing a real energy transition for the whole region. That's a short introduction on our activities, and I'm open to questions now or later on after the other presentations.
Thank you very much. I'll keep the discussion later on and invite Professor to come and make a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so my presentation does not only look at energy efficiency, but also looking at energy from buildings, generating from buildings. And unfortunately, you can't see the rest of the slide there. I also advise our city, Southampton City, in relation to their energy and other aspects of it. So how many people know where Southampton is? Brilliant, about 10%. There it is. So it's the Riviera of the UK. So if you ever want to come to the UK, come to Southampton. Right. So I think you know this stuff. Cities are basically 2% of the land mass. They consume about 75% of our resources, and also they have greater than 50% of our population, going up to 70 or 80% by 2050. But they are also the emitters of the maximum 80% of our emissions. And that's why it's important to look at cities. The other thing for us in the UK, which is important, is our Energy and Climate Change Act. In fact, the Climate Change Act stipulates that we should have a reduction of our emissions from 1990 by 2020 of 34%, and by 2050 of 80%. This Climate Change Act is very important because it could not be turned by any government unless they have a 2/3 majority. It's very difficult in UK Parliament to have that. So it's one of the pinnacles of actually addressing climate change in the UK. So I'm trying to figure out what cities could actually do to address that 80% reduction. What practical things could be done by cities to actually address it? So here is another evidence for you. If you just look at the middle aspect of it, for us in the UK, you get about 75% or 76% of consumption is actually happening in urban areas. So this is really where we need to attract our attention, is looking at urban areas, not only to reduce consumption, but also reduce emissions. So here's the city of Southampton. I'm not going to dwell on this before. It's got a lot of history. Basically, it's been demolished almost completely in the Second World War. And you can see the recent development of urban buildings are coming in the green and the yellow areas in Southampton. It's a city which is surrounded by also other cities and surrounded by water. And we are running out of land. So what we're looking at the moment is to actually grow up, density becoming the most important issue for us to think about if the city is going to grow. And also we have an aspiration, so we have a master plan. And those numbers there on the graphics show you the schemes that are currently being prepared within the city. It's about 3 billion investment by now into 2025. That's mainly centered on commercial retail aspect of it, but the government policy now have been changing in that we have to also provide housing. So that's part of what the advice for somebody like me to talk to the city about it, getting things more integrated between transport as well as green spaces as well as buildings. So we need to have a plan which is short and long term in order for us to achieve the targets for us. So what we have developed is an energy plan. So we have developed what we call a geographical information system of all the city, which includes all the green spaces, all the building, the transportation, all aspects of the city is integrated within that geographical information system. Then once you have that information, you can really play around with it in software. So what we've done is to look at basically what we have so far. So Southampton got a traditional aspect in relation to its energy. You've got district energy. We've got a geothermal plant, which is running from the late 80s. That actually supplied heating to the center of the city and some aspect of the city, around the city rather. And also, it's integrated with a cooling district as well. So there's a cooling aspect of that in Southampton. We're also looking at our waste. So we have, opposite to the Southampton Water, we've got an incinerator, which we estimate to have about 40 megawatt that we could tap into that to deliver heat to the city. And what we're planning to do is to link it up with the other district heating schemes within the city. Okay, that requires investment, so it requires innovation and investments. And because the cities in the UK now have been hammered by reduction in in budgets, it's very difficult to look at these fiscal instruments to deliver it. So I've just said that. So the talk today is about energy efficiency. So looking at citywide refurbishment and simulating those in software, looking at what the estimate will be, can we link that to investment? And then the next one, to looking at buildings as generators. If you've got the data of all the buildings, then it's very easy for you to take it further and actually see whether those buildings become generators. And the city itself now have about 0.5 megawatt of photovoltaics on the roofs of these buildings. Okay, so there is some inheritance in there. And the reason for this is that there is evidence, academic evidence to show if you actually connect people with photovoltaics, or they have photovoltaic on the roofs of their buildings, they become much energy conscious and they become much more energy efficient. There's also income for the city in relation to feed-in tariffs. So another income stream coming out from the buildings to the city. I'll talk to you later on when I get to the end about what we're trying to do. So here's the methodology. So this is the total footprint, because I don't have time. I'm going to go step by step. This is the total footprint of any building, looking at it from the basis of the building material round to how many windows and so forth that you're going to have. Once we have that in software, then we have an intervention strategies. Could you replace your single pane window with a double glaze or triple glaze? Could you have roof and floor insulation, wall insulation, and so forth? So 3 interventions mentioned there. And then you need, as an academic institution, you need to validate your results. So what we've done is that we've got all the data on about 10% of the buildings in Southampton that belong to the council. We've got the data of how much the consumption is, how much they pay for it, and so forth. We also bought from another entity what's called an energy performance certificate of 50% of the buildings for the city of Southampton. So those give us an indication how to validate your results, okay? To give us evidence, to give the strength and robustness of our analysis. And then you can go and figure out what these interventions, technology interventions, will achieve in relation to energy efficiency. And hopefully I'll give you some numbers later on. And those hard interventions could be coupled up with social acceptability, economics, and so forth, to give you another indication of how much these soft targets will achieve. Do you need to revise the technology targets with the soft targets or not? And then you can build that on basically, you can see it at the bottom, about policy instruments and investment in instruments. And you can see what else you're going to have. And then once you've done that results, you can look at district heating, you look at photovoltaics, you look at anything else you need to do, couple up with that analysis. So, and then there's a future gazing scenario. What future technology is likely to be here, okay? Perhaps all the glass could be photovoltaic, rather than actually having glass which is not photovoltaic. Perhaps all the glass which is relevant to be photovoltaic could be changed and also adapted to that. And then you look at the final outcome in terms of energy efficiency and reduction in emissions. So we did the analysis, and this is the first 4 towers that were refurbished by the City Council. And we did the analysis. So you see the graph at the bottom, and relevant to the various interventions that we have. I can't see it very well from here, but you can see the various reduction. And our estimate from our software is that a reduction of about 51% of consumption is achievable by those interventions that have been done in the building and simulated in our software. Now, we've got the bills back after 1 year of the interventions, and it's about 42%, okay? So if you couple up behavior aspect and things like that, you probably will have to reduce it and so forth. So we're looking at the behavior now. But the numbers that you really wanted to look at in terms of the city are these numbers, okay? So you present it to the city, you say, here is your consumption as a city for 2013, 865 gigawatt hours in terms of heat. You can actually displace about 27% of that if you do all the refurbishment of all the buildings that you have. And these are the numbers the cities are looking for. They're not looking for something fancy. They're looking at what practical things they can achieve and what are the investment requirement. Okay, so that's on the side of energy efficiency. Looking at the side of photovoltaics, we've got all the data about the buildings. Very easy now to take it up. And here is the map for the solar radiation in Southampton City. Anybody support Southampton as a football club? Well, there you go, the football club right in the middle of that. And next to it is some of the gasworks that have been abandoned and so forth. You can see the river in Southampton as well. You can see the common and so forth. And you can see some features in there. You can actually see the features that we have, whether they are buildings, whether they are chimneys in buildings, or whether they have those as trees and things like that. And those features are taken into account in our simulation. So here is the bit of photovoltaic simulation. The roof must be facing south. It has appropriate inclination to allow you the maximum capture, no shading. And also, we actually looked at things which are about 8 meters square or higher, just to make sure we are conservative with our estimates. And so this is what we did. We looked at the solar radiation for the city, radiation received by the roof, and then the PV applicability area. So doing some software analysis within the GIS to give us this. And here's what we have for the domestic sector. Here's what we have for the what you call a non-domestic sector. And here are the results. So because buildings have got different sizes, you need to size your photovoltaics according to 3 criteria. 3 kilowatts or less, 3 to 15 kilowatts, and higher 15 kilowatts. And here's the sum. We estimate that with our conservative analysis, 258 megawatt of power could be produced by Southampton from its own buildings. And that gives you the equivalent energy that could be you can get out from that in terms of gigawatt hours. So here's the analysis for different sector, non-domestic and domestic. The thing that you can't see because of the heads of my colleagues there is that Southampton consumption in 2011 is about 1,015 gigawatt hours, okay? And the number that we came up with from our analysis is that 25% of those gigawatt hours consumed could be replaced by having photovoltaics on those buildings. And those are the numbers that made the council think very seriously about it, in relation to energy efficiency as well as these. So the numbers that you asked for when we started working, here you go. This is just the analysis for the domestic sector. And you can see that the power generated by PV could displace about 18%, I can see it from here, of what's being consumed. So this is really without getting the industrial estates or larger industries included in the analysis, just for the domestic sector, because that's what was the interest for us to do. So there you have some of these results. So we presented this to the utility, and they said, oh, you can't do this. 250 gigawatt in the city, we may not have the capacity. I said, okay, fine, let's have the data. They said, we can't give you the data, okay? So I looked at their internet, and I found out that I can get the data for all the transformers in the city, right? And I can see where the transformers are, and here's the data for the transformers. There are only 2 transformers that will go over 50% capacity. So I went back and presented to them the data. I said, oh, okay, very good. So let's go and help you out how to achieve it. So now we are in negotiation between them and the city to get some achievement on this. Summary, there you go. I was there. I was there, man. I was there. So there you go. This is really to tell you that we did a systematic and robust approach to energy efficiency and photovoltaic generation from the cities. It looks at the building type. It looks at the sizes that we have for the roof and so forth. It is validated by the energy performance certificates and by data that we have from the buildings. We are exploiting this data for providing some pathways for the city to invest in it. Within the current UK feed-in tariff, it's actually still pay for itself less than 8 years. Okay, if you actually invest in this, still pays for it under a reduced regime of feed-in tariff, still pays for it within 8 years. But the most critical thing for us, and I mentioned this before, is actually having the fiscal instrument to make it happen. And people who can't afford it, could we rent the roof from them? Is there another private sector that we can get in there and so forth? And we need to plan this as an opportunity to work globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's start. I think, I'm sorry that you have been exposed with the presentation, and I hope that the presentation you can put it off a little bit, so then people are not too exposed in the light. Can we start with Mazen? Yes. Okay, so Mother, you know that, in the previous sort of session, the transport sessions, somebody was saying, cities are melting pots, basically. On one hand, you have national policies, then you have local policies. You have then public sector, people, behavioral changes needs to be moderated. Technology coming from multiple places as well, you see. So from the private sector's point of view, how do we sort of take advantage of the situation of being melting pot? And how do we coordinate this, partnership, okay? Public-private sector partnership, or together with civil societies? Because I think, it sounds to me, as a layman like myself, right? Policies, there seems to be somewhere a lot of examples there. Technology, wow, coming up on those things. It's a matter of how do we do it? So how do we do it includes sort of bringing people, organizations, sort of system together on that. So can you give us sort of some insight on that?
Yes, for sure. Hi, everyone. So it's not an easy question to answer to, actually, because, I'm not going to repeat the global energy challenge where the energy demand will double by 2050 and we have to reduce the CO2 emissions by 2 and so on and so forth. And we know that, that the energy challenge will be won or lost in the cities because this is where we are consuming the biggest part of the energy. But at the same time, if we want to tackle this challenge, we have to make cities more efficient. And making cities more efficient is not an easy question to answer to because every city is different. Every city is different with its own culture, its traditions, its climate, its geography, and so on. So every city will have its own story. Every city will have to create its own collaboration. And within this collaboration, you have to have all the different parties you just talked about. So private sector, government, municipality, utilities, citizen at the center for sure, regulators, financiers, and so on. And it starts by having all these people sitting around the same table and building one vision for this distinguished city that we have to target, okay, and building the roadmap together as well. So I'm afraid I didn't answer your question, but I don't think this is a question that can be answered to that easily. Okay, so I was involved in the program of Dubai from the private sector side, and I know that everybody was around the table. The private sector has its own place. The government has its own place, and it was led by the government. In some other cities, it's not the government who is leading. Maybe it's another party. But here it's the government who was leading the smart plan of Dubai. And technology or the private sector to a certain extent was somehow the enabler.
Thank you. Fabrics. Finance. So this is a global number. Global number says that if we want to double the rate of improvement in energy efficiency next 15 years, so current level of investment in energy efficiency needs to be tripled, minimum. That's sort of some analysis that it says on that one. It seems to me it's a very big challenge. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe you're working on as a project manager on that. Can you sort of, give us some insights about financing challenges and opportunities moving forward?
So I've been working for the last 4 years in a multidisciplinary team, in R&D, in EDF, working specifically on urban planning and energy. And we strongly believe in urban planning first. I mean, for us, planning comes first. And we come out with some figures now we could expose. In fact, when you start urban planning, you draw some very strategic lines regarding land use, regarding morphology of your city, regarding transportation, and so and so. From this very strategic line, then you draw a framework. Are you going to use heating networks, cooling networks? Do you really want to achieve renewables? Do you want to produce locally? That's the second step. The third step for us is the choice of technologies. So technologies come at last. And if you look at it, it's worth spending more money on the first stage than on the last one. In fact, the first drawings, the first steps of urban planning, they decide for about 80% of the energy you're going to consume. It's no use trying to put photovoltaics on your buildings if from the beginning the structure of the building was not planned for it. It's not use trying to make smart traffic if from the beginning you didn't draw the streets, you didn't plan some public transportation for this transportation. And there are so many examples. Density is also a very important example. If you have a very dense city in a cold country, you will spend much less energy than if you spread over on your land. Same thing for transportation. You know, this very famous study from Peter Kenworthy about several cities, like US cities which spread over their territories, and Asian cities, very dense and packed. And if you look at the energy consumed just for transportation, it goes from 1 to 5 on this criteria. So that's another very important thing, and it comes from really the first drawing on the urban planning. The land use is also something really fundamental. If you zone your city with tertiary activities on one side, residential activity on the other side, industrial, hotels, if you do that, then you're going to induce lots of traffic every day. Every day people commute from one zone to another. If you try to mix these activities, at least you give the opportunity to people to live and work at the same place, and you limit transportation. So it's quite simple what we say, but it's very difficult to build. It can be done for new cities, of course. You start from a white paper, it's always easier. But it can also be done for existing cities, because cities are living. Over centuries, building refurbished, cities change a lot. So it is still possible to change that with planning.
Thank you. Questions? We spoke a lot, so we'd like to listen. Any questions, comments from the audience? I'm sorry, I can't see everybody, but hopefully it's this one. Okay, can microphone be passed, please? First, thank you.
I introduced myself before, so I'm not going to do it for people who don't know French Embassy, to make it short. I'm just wondering, and you are Sustainable Energy for All, why don't we have an initiative on energy efficiency?
Good question. I will take one more question, please.
Thanks. It's Juliet Daniels from CDP here. My question is for Professor Abubakar. Thank you very much for the example of Southampton. Really interesting to see what you're doing. That was a lot of work that you did to get the energy company to actually listen to you and cooperate. Do you have any advice for replicability for other cities, or is it a case of everybody doing that individually, that much work to get reluctant energy companies to cooperate?
Thank you very much. Professor, you may want to start, and then I'll come back to the first question.
I think it's a really very good question, because energy companies are very, very reluctant to either part with information or to be part of anything that will make them do some work. And we had Parkers in Southampton City, and I'm on the on the committee actually looked at the power for Southampton. So it is really having the data and present them with the data that makes them open their eyes to say, here is, a solution that doesn't need any investment. But they are very reluctant all the time. I know that many of the solar farms that are around, especially in airports and things like that, could not get the planning, could not get the actual inception of the project because we don't have enough capacity on the grid to take that up, and it will cost a lot of money to do it. So I hope our utility through Ofgem, and now everything's going up through Ofgem. Ofgem is the regulator for us in the UK. They will actually try and do something about it themselves as the regulator, and hopefully it could be replicated somewhere else.
Thank you. Now, Sustainable Energy for Initiative, energy efficiency is a very big focus. And then we have an initiative called Global Energy Efficiency Accelerators. And then in the COP21 too, we did a series of things. And then last year or 2 years ago, when the Secretary General had the climate summit in New York, we launched a series of those things. And then giving a focus on a couple of sort of the issues, like building, transport, or the appliances, and then forming a kind of focus group which is led by international organizations and businesses together. And then try to sort of define a common objective and then put sort of the needle on the ground, leading into the investment at the end of the day. I do not know whether we have Fleming from Danfoss. I saw him somewhere sitting. Okay, so then we have the person from Danfoss, and then who is leading, for example, district heating accelerator platform, and then able to join. You? Yes. Or you had a different question?
The idea is, especially maybe on the relationship between energy efficiency, something on the border picture, something that could incentivize governments to develop policies that are favorable for energy efficiency, something that covers more generally the subject and making links with renewable energy. Which is just a question, but it's a question that a number of people have.
Yes, so two things. So we need both sort of the leadership and the system. So on the part of the system, we started creating a network of actors so that we'll be able to push what you're saying on the ground, because it shouldn't be about the global level discussions as such. So a couple of countries stood up on those things. So together with UNEP, and Jitoni is sitting over there representing UNEP, we have created energy efficiency hub in Copenhagen. So they are becoming the technical capacity to be able to reach out and work with the governments on the ground to start moving forward on the energy efficiency and then, effecting changes on the regulations and policies, and also supporting the capacity building a lot. Then we'll be able to attract more private sector investments. Now, this cannot be done in isolation from others. So we're pushing sort of, in each government to be able to commit themselves toward the three objective access, renewable efficiency at the same time. So this becomes a part and parcel of energy transformation of any countries moving forward on that. So that is one of the subjects that this Habitat 3 is supposed to take up. In the city's context, what do you want government's leader to commit to? And can we describe a little more sharply than we did in the Sustainable Development Goals in linking to the efficient cities context? Can we describe some sentence on that one? And a person sitting here, Dan's here from the UAE government, will be able to take up your suggestions, and I make sure that he will deliver in Quito. So that's a deal. And then any sort of suggestion, questions, of course, welcome. And then probably we can do one more round if you want to. Any comments? Yes, sir.
If I could say something about the UN Habitat regime. So people think just about, for example, in refurbishment of buildings, people just think about the fabric of the building. Actually, refurbishment of, for example, what we're trying to do, refurbishment on large scale, those tower blocks that we're talking about, it does not just stop at the building fabric. It actually looks at the green spaces. It looks at the way that you look at transport and so forth. So it is a better way of making those much more livable environment for those people in those buildings, that including the habitats around it.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, comments? If not, I'll invite one word from each of the panelists. Mazen, you want to start?
Yes, so energy efficiency, I would look at the energy ecosystem if you want. I wouldn't look only at the energy efficiency in terms of efficiency in buildings, etc. We're seeing a disruption in the energy ecosystem with renewables on one side, with decentralization of energy on the other side, with the behavior of the citizens. So citizens are prosumers now, and they are so producers and consumers at the same time. So we're seeing a big disruption in the energy ecosystem, and it's making it a bit complex. So there are a lot of areas to work on the efficiency of the energy. Some of the areas are renewable, then energy efficiency, and third is somehow, I'm talking about the technology aspect, is the smart grid. So the converging the IT and the OT of the infrastructure. So IT, information technology, OT, operational technology, to manage the grid, the power grid on one platform, making it efficient, shaving the peaks, and so on and so forth. So we have to look at this energy ecosystem with a holistic view, rather than by silos.
Fabrice?
I think we need real demonstrators. We have lots of studies, we have lots of theories. If you really want to do collaborative design and collaborative development, you need to put the people around the table, because urban planning does not only have an impact on energy, it has also, and energy can have lots of impact on health impact, social impact, and it's very wide ecosystem. If you don't have all the people around the table, you may make the wrong choices. So we strongly believe into collaborative design. We have the tools today, thanks to lots of data that we have, lots of tools which allow to do modeling and to show to people what would be the consequences of their choices. But to do that, you need a real case. And I think lots of cities want to test and to be labs. It's open proposal.
Thank you, Professor.
I think for me, energy efficiency is not only about technological fixes. It's all about already mentioned their behavior, but also about information technology. I need to know, for example, how much is this hitting me in relation to my pocket, my consumption, and so forth. I want also to know in comparison to my neighbor without knowing which ones they are, if they are better than me or worse than me. So that's something that we need to think about for the future because of our technology in relation to communication being expanded. But more importantly, it's all about education. We need to get that to the schools from day one. We need to get it right across. We need universities to be the bastions of energy efficiency, and it's not happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn?
Yes, thank you for having the last word today. I do agree with my colleague sitting next to me that an integrated approach is very important, and I want to plead for not only looking at smart solutions, which are I'm very positive about. If I see around here, there are a lot of interesting new technologies, renewable technologies, but also on improving energy efficiency. But I would like to, it has to coincide with the sustainability in the broader context. And I was surprised, or not surprised, but I was pleased by the example of Southampton, for example. But I think there is a lot to do also in developing countries. I've been last year in India, for example, and if you see to the challenge over there to improve energy efficiency and sustainability of the cities, that's a real challenge that lies before us. And so we need to move forward, but I'm quite positive that we will manage.
Thank you very much. Lastly, that at the United Nations, energy efficiency become finally the official goal. So we'll keep pushing next 15 years. I hope that you'll join. And please, if you have any suggestion to this H3, send it to us. And it's not closed yet, so we'll be able to look at it together and make sure your suggestion is going to be taken into consideration. So with this one, I would like to thank, big thanks to the panelists, and thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Dan.